right, let's jump in. It is a heck of an after-action report.
Nick? Is his name Nick?
What's up?
The other student? His name's Nick?
Yeah, what about him?
No,
We just don't know his name.
yeah, I just couldn't.
He's so quiet, right?
I thought it was Nick, but like I didn't want to be wrong.
It's always good to check. Let's see. All right, so for wilderness management, our learning objective here is to wilderness. Throughout the semester, we're kind of connecting sort of the philosophical principles guiding recreation and specifically forest wilderness management through kind of like the legal and historical background of it, all the way to sort of the functional skills of being a wilderness manager. And so we've been talking about how we want to get some kind of a sense of what's the day-to-day skill set. And last week we spent some time, about a class session and a half, talking through this idea of specifically PPV, per view shed or viewscape, versus PAOT, the number, just the total head count of people present. So we talk about this a little bit in regular recreation management, but this really matters a whole lot more. It has a lot more consequence on wilderness management. So we want to drill down a little bit deeper with some more specific and accurate practices on that in terms of what's the day-to-day tactic of what you're doing. So this is a map analysis, essentially a viewshed analysis or a line of sight analysis for the Bald Knob Wilderness. So this is in our backyards here on the Shawnee. And this is a map I put together for safer areas to go plinking, just target shooting in the wilderness on the Shawnee. That is zero line of sight to any features like trails or campsites or structures, permanent rec facilities and stuff like that. And the hardest part is making sure that you're doing that with zero line of sight to any hiking trails, because sure as shit, if you squeeze off a couple of rounds and something goes stray, it's going to find like the one person anywhere around. That 1 in a million shot happens.
I almost got shot in my garden last year.
Yeah.
I was just gardening and I heard a bullet whiz over my head and I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
And I was hearing a neighbor shooting and stuff, so.
And it's like, wait a minute.
Got in my car and drove over there. I'm like, hey, check your fucking fire. Like,
Yeah.
I heard the hiss.
Yeah.
It was close.
And if you have the sensation of, wait a minute, I got out of the military so I didn't have to deal with this bullshit anymore, you shouldn't have to drive over to your neighbor's house and put your life in danger in that way, confronting him saying, hey, check your fire. So this is the kind of thing, this is not the specific analysis that a wilderness backcountry ranger is making, right? So this kind of thing is actually kind of on the user, which is why I made this map and I can't go to the Shawnee National Forest website and download this map. It's not their job, right? So in wilderness, where it's a much more unconfined, primitive, self-directed kind of recreation and human use of this habitat, you're not obligated as the wilderness manager to do stuff like this, but you are absolutely thinking along these lines. So this is still an instructive kind of map for us to talk through. So basically, for the purposes of lining out day-to-day responsibilities, the knowledges, skills, and abilities for what to do here, this is going to be off-site management in terms of figuring out stuff like this. Again, not making a safer shooting areas map because that's on the user, but thinking through kind of the inverse of this. Like, if I have a bunch of people hiking this access line to the Godwin Trail through this corridor here, right? There's quite a bit of line of sight because you're basically walking through a dry creek bed for a big chunk of it, and it's fairly straight through that area. And there's not a lot of vegetation in the creek beds, so if we're focusing or we're finding a bunch of visitors in those spots, then shoot, we need to understand the sensation of crowding is going to be much, much higher because we've set up our trailheads, our access points, for example, to focus use into a high visibility area. And we as the wilderness managers, we do have that responsibility, not so much to make specific activity maps, but to understand, shoot, we're putting this trail in here, that's where people are going, right? Over 99% of use is going to be along trails because rolled ankles are a thing. Most of us are looking to get out into the wilderness, and the most efficient way to do that is along a constructed trail. So, practically speaking, that means in order to scratch that lower PPV itch that all of our visitors typically have for a wilderness area, close to 100%, we are deliberately making trails that wind and switch back and go around the backside of a ridge on purpose, knowing that it makes the trail longer, knowing that it makes the trail harder, and knowing that it makes, in particular for us, the ongoing maintenance of that trail bigger, right? More snakiness on the landscape, more sinuosity or degrees per meter, or kilometer or mile, whatever. That just means more trail maintenance, means more work. And it complicates stuff like search and rescue. But we have to be able to see that kind of switchbacking on the map. Even, we're pretty zoomed in here, right? That's a 1 mile scale bar down in the bottom right hand corner. But with this, you know, this is not just a good idea, this is the kind of thing that we're checklisting and we're doing. And we're updating our thoughts on this every couple of years, typically, would be the monitoring interval for asking, all right, what's our PPV? How are people, where are people actually stacking up in our wilderness area and just kind of crowding on top of each other? Yeah.
Don't they use trail cameras for that too, to get a better view?
You can, but this is wilderness, and we cannot use a higher tech tool if a lower tech option, putting some poor bastard sitting at a trail junction or at the trailhead, that's lower tech.
More
So
money, though.
minimum tool rule, right?
More money though.
More money. But the minimum tool rule doesn't really speak to money or cost. It speaks more to what's the minimum level of viable mechanization technology to solve the issue.
Well, the reason
Right.
I said more money was because practicality. You
Yeah,
said
absolutely.
Practicality is something.
Absolutely, 100%.
If I was in practical paying some guy, I'm assuming he's one of our degrees carrying motherfuckers.
Yep.
So $25 to $35 an hour to sit there at the trailhead and check one, okay, you came back, put a check by him.
Yeah,
You know,
but
it's just easier to use a camera to monitor too.
yeah, so the end run that some places have used around that is if there is a good sort of long shot, and you want a long shot, not a close in like a trail camera, like a wildlife camera, because we don't want to see people's faces. We don't want to be on the hook for collecting PII, personally identifiable information. And these days with sort of big data, automated identification stuff, mostly honestly pioneered by China, they don't even need to see your face. They can do gait analysis and silhouette analysis and stuff like that. So the way that you walk is just as uniquely characteristic as your face or the pattern of veins in your retina or veins in your hand or your fingerprint. And you can identify people very, very effectively in that way. So there, you know, in other countries, the choice is to deploy that against certain disfavored ethnic groups. China's running concentration camps of over 1 million people right now. But, right, well, that's, you know, that's neither here nor there for wilderness management. Anyway, so the American federal system, you know, we we're trying to be foresters, right? If we can just put the camera further back and be able to see bodies, but not like anything identifying about them except for a couple of pixels for their shirt color or whatever, you know, that's a much, much, much preferred option. And you can do that typically across the street from the lot. So you have close camera system there. But how are you gonna power that, right? So now you're getting into either posting this up close to power lines, or with like a big invisible solar panel setup, and it's more technology, it's more development, it's more sort of quasi-permanent installation that we're genuinely trying to move away from as aggressively as possible inside the perimeter of this place. So, all that to say, and you know, people legitimately don't like the sensation of, oh man, I'm on camera as I leave my car here. That doesn't feel good, right? Because what is the government doing with even that basic information? And that's the real thing. So the day-to-day solution becomes, you know, put the camera outside the wilderness area where it's legitimately allowed, or every couple of years, collect some manual meet computer data of when, where, how many people, when, what time of day, and stuff like that. And that's called turning movements, and it's called rates. So turning movements are, we'd have somebody at the Godwin-Bridgman Trail intersection here. Kind of, this is the big sort of transit hub, so to speak, for this area. There are some other trails that go down here and access to the south. You can walk up and down the creek line and continue east-west along the Godwin Trail after dropping down through that gap. So if you have somebody sitting right there and just recording, you know, today we saw 5 people pass by, and 4 out of the 5 were heading from east to west and did not turn north up Bridgman Trail, then now we know those turning movements, as they're called, and we pair that with that lot count data that you guys have practiced doing. So for every 10 people, my best guess, my informed guess, is that 80% of them, 4 out of 5, are gonna be starting at the east end of Godwin Trail and continuing west on Godwin Trail up to Inspiration Point, looking out over the Mississippi and stuff like that. And 20% are gonna be heading up towards the Cody Bridgman site, and so forth. And that's not completely accurate, right? It's not exactly 80%. It's not the same proportions in the winter versus the summer. It's not the same proportions if it's hikers versus horseback riders, right? There's a lot of variance in here. But it's also not completely wrong. We went out and got that real live data, that 80% going east to west and 20% going east to north, accounting for 100% of our observed traffic anyway. So we pair the PPV stuff, or we generate the PPV sense of things with pairing the regression count at the lot with turning movements on the inside, okay? And take a look at that. We start to get, you can imagine, kind of a sense of a heat map, not of spots that are away from trails, but hot spots along the trails, right? So this is just a busy spot. This is where people throw down their packs because you're up on a ridge line on the East Godwin Trail. You drop down here. This is a perfect place for lunch, take a dump, and then you're sweating it out again, going up and down ridge lines and gaps on Godwin Trail West from there. So that means we get a lot of people dropping packs right there, and that's where everybody's going to see everybody else, and that's where it could potentially be a problem. In wilderness areas like at Yosemite National Park, where we have basically, this is Yosemite. Here's the valley area, and here's Half Dome. A huge geologic feature, a couple of 1,000-foot sheer vertical cliff, and there's a wilderness hike that starts down in the valley, and you basically walk through the wilderness for a couple hours to get to the line that forms of up to hundreds of people standing in line in the wilderness to wait to get up the steel cables to the top of Half Dome. And it's a much higher consequence situation than like, oh no, one group saw one other person at this Godwin Trail junction with Bridgman Trail. This is literally hundreds of people for hours at a time. And when the weather gets bad, everybody's trying to come down off of Half Dome, and people are slipping and falling and dying right in front of each other, like rolling until their bodies just sort of fall apart down the slick granite as it's wetted because they got away from those steel safety cables to try and get around somebody else. It's a mess. And it is the kind of thing where somebody gets the bad idea and other people are like, oh, well, this guy's doing it, why don't I do it, right? So, understanding this queuing effect, where congested areas get busy just like rush hour on roads, it's a real thing. It has real safety of life consequences and not just rolled ankles, although rolled ankles are pretty serious in the wilderness in the first place. So, is this making sense? Right? So the day-to-day move is, and it's at two different times I'm aware of. I was a grad student at the time, and one of my fellow grad students, his summer job was to capture a bunch of data about how congested that wilderness trail section at Half Dome was. So, we got paid to live and work out at Yosemite for the summer in the wilderness section, and it was pretty nice. Except it was also awful because people are shitty to each other as they woke up at 2 a.m. to try and catch sunrise on the dome, and so did 100 other people, and everybody's grouchy, and it's not particularly safe, and, you didn't come to Yosemite to wait in line in the wilderness. So, this is a real thing that means we gotta collect some real data and manage it pretty aggressively. Intensive use requires intensive management. All right. So, our workflow on skills to connect the dots is going to be lot regression counts plus turning movement plus, so this is just like, again, just like we talk about in recreation management or park management. This is just looking at humans as another wildlife species. Where is their habitat getting overutilized? Where is their overpopulation locally or temporarily? And the crucial third piece that most of us foresters are not trained to look for, but what is the effect of the physical situation on the mind of the person experiencing that physical situation? Okay, so lot counts gives us a sense of how many people are flowing into the system. Turning movements gives us a sense of where they are flowing into the system and when, and the perception of that PPV, the opinion attached to the PPV that you see, is kind of like a multiplier. So if you have, say, 350 people waiting in line at the steel cables to go up Half Dome at Yosemite, then that's the physical reality. That's the people per view shed at that particular spot on a typical summer peak season day. Pretty straightforward. But if all of those 350 people were expecting to be in line with 1,000 people, well, it turns out
They're a lot happier.
everybody's fine. They're good. They're in a good mood, right? So if they come expecting Disney World conditions and they see anything less than that, they're good to go. It could have been much worse. It could have been much worse. But if they are showing up to Half Dome with an engagement ring in their pocket and they were really hoping to get this world-class recreation site to themselves so they could have a special moment, in that couple's history, they're pissed. It's like, oh, I knew this was a fucking mistake. This is a disaster. I can't believe, I'm I'm spending $5 grand on this trip and however much on the ring, and this was supposed to be just us. But here's the thing. The objective on-site stuff hasn't changed a bit. Still 350 people present.
Right, but the mindsets have changed because one dumbass
Exactly.
thought he could have the whole mountain to himself.
Exactly. And it just doesn't work like that in certain places at certain times, right? Inspiration Point is another spot like this, right? Oh, it's awesome, it's beautiful, it's perfect to, pop the question to somebody. That has happened multiple times since I've been a professor here, just among the forestry students. But you get there and there's a ton of graffiti and it's super windy and cold and some people don't feel real safe scrambling out onto the rock and stuff like that. And so the objective on-site conditions, they matter, right? Like if that graffiti isn't there, that matters. If the graffiti is there, it matters. But it only matters because it changes the perception and the evaluation of that perception. The opinions that people have about how much is too much. Graffiti, how much is too much litter? Any, right? How much is too many other people crowding that tiny little lot and forcing you to park up the street on that sort of section along Snake Road, right? So it gets more complicated when we have human beings. All right, so we gotta triangulate what's the on-site situation versus what did people expect. All right, so objective, nobody can dispute the numbers. Subjective, these numbers are going to be a little bit different for every single person in terms of their perceptions and but generally speaking, folks cluster around the same typical range. Like most folks, just to make up numbers for Yosemite again, most folks are going to think that 10 people waiting in line to get to the cables, not a big deal, right? Just have a quick chat with like the two groups in front of us and we'll just wait our turn and we'll go. 350 people, most folks will cluster around that and say this is way too many people. This line is snaking around and there's somebody in a uniform like managing us and it's like this isn't wilderness at all. And so forth. Alright? So combining the objective and the subjective together as folks do in their heads, so we might as well be aware of it. That's the resource condition. So in the same way as when you're doing a timber stand improvement plan, you're collecting information on how many stems of what DBH and what species are in this plot that you're measuring, and so forth. And extrapolating that out to the whole area versus what you've actually surveyed with your BAF prism or whatever. We're collecting this data, objective and subjective, to figure out what's the condition of this plot, of this wilderness site or area, just like with pure natural resource based measurements. So forest measurements, all that stuff still applies. We're still using every one of those skills for this. We're just adding to it, talking with people occasionally, every couple of years, to figure out, okay, so how was your trip today? How many people did you see? What did you think about how many people you saw today? Was that kind of fine or not so much? And it tends to be a real gag reflex response. So like, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. Oh, too many, like way too many. And that can be a change of 5 to 10 people encountered. It doesn't have to be a huge jump. But it's fine, it's fine, it's fine until it's really not. So, that's tricky.
Little Run DMC right there.
That's right. It's tricky. That was one of the songs in the what was the PlayStation game SSX Tricky? It's a snowboarding game. Yeah. That has nothing to do with anything. But anyway.
I wanted to find out pro skater as soon as that started singing,
Right.
but it wasn't on there.
So how do we get this stuff? We're building a model. We are throwing together in GIS or more dedicated software, like RBSim or something like that. We're basically collecting that lot data, throwing in the GIS layer of the trails and the line of sight, like the elevation layer, the DEM, right? And we're using that to run virtual hikers through, and we slow them down when they're trying to go up something real steep, go down something real steep. Letting things like injury events, which stops the group and triggers a search and rescue event, which cranks up the number of encounters quite a bit. And you see where those little sort of virtual hikers start piling up on each other, stuff like that. So part of your management for this, part of the skill set is, for the offsite stuff, doing GIS, doing modeling to figure out, okay, so I think people are probably piling up at that Godwin-Bridgman junction, but are they actually, or is that just my impression, taking my best educated guess? Usually your best educated guess isn't really wrong, but those simulation models, you can run them 10 million times and be like 99.9% sure this is how it is at least 85% of the time, or 90% of the time, or 95% of the time. You just keep running more iterations of the simulation with different random inputs and base all those inputs on like the actual lot counts and stuff, and you're good to go, right? So if you like games like SimCity or Cities and Skylines, stuff like that, where you're basically playing God and you're watching all the little people drive around in their vehicles and stuff, it's like that, just not a game. And then from there, you know, that simulation is telling you, look, your lot counts are fine, but people's perception of the crowding, they see like one other group and the whole day is ruined. So that means you gotta tune down those lot counts. You gotta make that smaller, or you gotta put in some kind of a permit process to only allow people to hit that trailhead at times when you know other people are not hitting the trailhead, because everybody's gotta have a permit and a specific time to enter that trail at that trailhead. And some wilderness areas are high enough demand that you're looking at permitting processes like that. But this is how you make that decision, right? Putting in a permit process for a wilderness trail, that's never gonna be popular. Why should it be? But if you really gotta protect the resources of the physical resources and that sense of wilderness solitude and stuff like that, well, that trailhead is about the only knob you can twist quickly to adjust conditions and stop people from piling up on each other in that way. You can make the trails one way. Everybody starts at this end of the Godwin Trail, and you walk the loop counterclockwise. Everybody, right? So that's a restriction. And that is definitely trading on that primitive and unconfined character of wilderness management that we have to check the box on. But if you have no other options, if you can get as primitive as possible with a restriction like a permit system where everybody walks the trail counterclockwise kind of thing, then that's gonna be your lowest tech, minimum tool way to do that, right? And it's not a physical tool, it's a management tool of putting in permits or whatever, but same idea. So, that's a lot of talking. Yikes.
How about we have a smoke break? I'm joking.
Vape if you got them, right? Any questions about this process? We're kind of bringing together the last 2 weeks of conversations, yeah.
So this all could have been like easily, like I want to use that Yellowstone thing you said.
Uh-huh.
Or I don't
Yosemite.
remember. Sorry, I have
No, you're good.
got a really bad fucking migraine. Why don't you put signs up like at the trailheads, like, hey guys, like this is going to be high congested area. Don't get your, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
something like that, because I mean, yeah, guys like us already know going into it. Yeah, there could be 10 people, there could be 1,000 people. It's not going to matter until we get there, sort of thing. You know what I mean? But
Right.
you got some people who don't know their ass from their dick and expect to go out there and get an Instagram picture, and they're not prepared. Sorry to throw Nash on the bus like this, but like Nash yesterday didn't have tennis shoes. I was in tennis shoes. They could slip and fall and fuck up everyone's trip over. So we should have signs posted like, make sure you have proper shoes, make sure you have this, make sure you have that. And if you don't have that, then you should check yourself and turn back and get the proper attire. Because just because you want to do something doesn't mean you're gonna ruin it for everyone else, kind of a thing.
Yeah, so equip
It's
people with
super
information,
selfish,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, so we talked about this on, I think, Thursday last week, where you know, there's this idea of you can directly modify people's behavior with a permit system. It's restrictive and stuff like that. It's very effective. But, you know, you're trading on people's enjoyment to check one of those other management boxes to protect the resource for them and for everybody else. And the resource might be the physical species involved, it might be the experience of wilderness, that solitude, that primitive, that unconfined, stuff like that. So, direct management is kind of about control. It's about behavior modification, stuff like that. Indirect is generally going to be that information provision, that educational approach of, all right, if I just equip people with enough knowledge, well then naturally they're gonna pick times when
It fits better to go
They're-
when they're, yeah.
it makes the utilization or the uptake of the resource, like we called it last week,
Yes, sorry.
it makes it much more evenly spread out and efficient and thorough. That works. But here's the problem. When we put that information at the trailhead, it's already too late, isn't it?
they
Because the
wouldn't
person
have to
showed
mind.
up at the trailhead, they're gonna read the sign and be like, you know, oh geez, between 10 and 2, this area is super crowded every day. Well,
We're already
it's
here.
10:15. We're already here. Exactly. I'm not gonna go like an asshole back to my hotel because we had to check out today. Like, we got our backpack gear, we're cocked and locked, we're ready to go. So, sometimes that works. If you can get people the information in advance so they can make meaningful, impactful changes to their logistics to align with what the reality on the ground is. When people are just showing up, because wilderness is primitive and unconfined recreation, you can just show up. Then we're gonna try and tell those folks as best we can with that trailhead sign. But, I mean, how many times have you ever started on a hike or a trip or something like that and it's, you know, there's a whole bunch of signs at the trailhead, so you sort of glance at them, look for any red text, and don't see any, move on, right? So, that's absolutely the trade-off in play. Direct management actions, they're effective, but they're unpopular. So we'll draw a little mad emoji, alright? Indirect, less effective, but not ineffective. But typically, educational interventions for stuff like trail decisions, that's effective in the 50 to 75% range when you post up somebody out there and have them watch what people actually do after receiving the treatment of the information and education. Direct effectiveness, 95 to 99% plus effective. But people don't like it, right? I'm not showing up to Bald Knob Wilderness to walk down a trail that's fenced in on both sides. That's not wilderness to me, right? That's semi-permanent structures that shouldn't even be there in the first place, in my opinion. But it's effective. I'm probably not gonna jump that fence just for the sake of jumping the fence. Whereas otherwise, if I'm just walking along the wilderness trail, maybe I do just go sideways into the wilderness. Maybe I find some of these spots where nobody from any point on any trail can see me. Maybe going cross country or off trail like that, that was the point of my trip, right? So that's gonna be more popular. And I'm making that decision based on the information that I have, maybe at the Shawnee's website or whatever. But it just doesn't work as well in terms of the down the road stuff. Like, you know, we're just not thinking about the trailhead sign stuff once we're a mile down the trail. We're thinking about what's right there in front of us. So if we don't see any direct site management type stuff to keep us on the trail, to aim us one direction or another to avoid a congested area, then, you know, I'm just not thinking about it, right? I'm making my decisions at that moment based on what's right in front of my feet. What's right in front of my feet. I cannot overstate that. Like, people are just, and maybe rightly so, maybe this is part of the point, but they're in the zone, you know? They're not thinking about the philosophy of wilderness management or the laws governing it and stuff like that. They're like, where do I put my foot next to avoid a route? What's around this next bend on the trail 50 feet ahead? They're not thinking about anything else. And that's a really good thing. That's a legitimately healthy thing. Neurologically, physiologically, emotionally. Some of the writers of the wilderness science and stuff like that would say it's like spiritually important to be in the moment, to leave all of the rest of this bullshit behind and just be present for a little while. Just be in your skin, and not up in your head, right? So, the information and education works pretty good, and we gotta do it anyway, so we might as well. But sometimes it's not enough by itself when we need to modify people's on-site movements and stuff like that. So, this is gonna give us a whole lot of on-the-ground effectiveness. Once we know where people are going, you know, the smart effort changes a little thing here or there in the right way with some wisdom and insight on it, some intelligence, and we can avert a lot of problems. Now, for unsubstitutable, unique, and world-class resources like the hike up to Half Dome and the views up there and the experience and all that stuff, there's just no substitute, right? They could cut that crowd in half by adding a whole ass other trail, but, you know, that's not going to be okay. Zoom back out here. That's not gonna work. It's not gonna be okay because even if you double the number of trails, you're still gonna have over 150 people queued up in line at those peak usage times. So if the only way to remove that sense of crowding is to get it down to like 5 people from hundreds, then you bite the bullet and say, you know what? For this 100-yard section where people are just hanging out, this is technically wilderness, but we're gonna carve it out and be like, this is just not gonna be a wilderness experience for you. There's no way we can fix this without completely ripping out what you expect. All right. So there you go. Cool. All right, so we're working towards being able to do some of this modeling. We'll do a real simple version of it here in class together coming up. And then, you know, I need to put in another section of trail. I need to reload. I need to move a section of this trail to help a lot of people avoid each other in a constructive way. We're gonna close down all of the campsites that are real close to that Godwin Trail, Bridgman Trail junction, because if there's a bunch of tents set up right there, then that's massively increasing everybody's dwell time in that area, and everybody sees everybody as they pass through that spot. If we say no camping right there, but you can camp literally anywhere else where you can't see from the trail, well then, that's fine. We can have as many people camping there as we want, and nobody can see anybody else, so 0 crowding. But the objective count of bodies on site is the same. So, have you guys ever been to, this is a pretty common Forest Service thing. You're allowed to camp anywhere you want to for up to 2 weeks at a time, but you can't be inside of a trail. You have to be a quarter of a mile from a trail, or you have to be at least half a mile from the trailhead, right? That's a super easy way to take all of this PPV, all this crowding, all that stuff, and just completely erase the perception of it, right? So if we take this term, the perception of crowding, to 0, doesn't matter how many people are in the lots, doesn't matter which way they're going, the turning movements, we're Gucci, right? We can have thousands of people in a tiny little wilderness area like this, and if everybody's playing by the rules and hiding from each other, we're golden. We're absolutely golden. All right, any questions about this? All right, let's pack it in a little bit early. I'm around for questions here for a sec. If you have them, we'll get ready to do a real simple simulation model. We don't have to be programmers or anything like that, but we'll kind of connect the dots on those lot counts you guys have been doing, stuff like that, and see where it goes. All right.
Did you make that map on GIS?
Second?
Did
you make that on GIS?
I did.
It's your phone.
Yeah, I'll grab it. So
Yeah, and I
Did you
also-
did you do like one of the
I did a line of sight analysis taking into account the curvature of the Earth. Like this is proper.
did you put that like did you map that all by hand or did you do one of those like and or functions? You know
Oh,
what I'm saying?
yeah, it's
I never figured out in GIS